Oh, I'm gonna get banned for that because Zuckerberg sucks. Zuckerberg, you suck dick. That shit tastes like chlorine. Anyway. Ricky Henderson, greatest leadoff hitter ever. Greatest base stealer ever.
And again, everybody who's watching this around the world basically saw, let's say, U.S. establishment or Democrat-aligned folks just decapitate,
a rabbi. This is the worst.
Digitally, right? Like, just boom, gone. Okay. And they're like, well, if they can do that in public to the U.S. president, who's ostensibly the most powerful man in the world, what does the Mexican president stand against that? Nothing. Regardless of whether it was justified on this guy, that means they will do it to anybody. Now the seal is broken. Just like the bailouts, as exceptional as they were in the first area, we were shocked by them, then they became a policy instrument. And now there's bailouts happening. Every single bill is printing another whatever $1 billion or something like that.
The following is a conversation with Balaji Srinivasan, an angel investor, tech founder, philosopher, and author of The Network State, How to Start a New Country. He was formerly the CTO of Coinbase and general partner at Andreessen Horowitz. This conversation is over 7 hours.
Holy fuck.
For some folks, that's too long. For some, too short. For some, just right. There are chapter timestamps, there are clips, so you can jump around, or like I prefer to do with podcasts and audiobooks I enjoy, and sit down, relax, with a loved human, animal, or consumable substance, or all three if you like, and enjoy the ride from start to finish. Balaji is a fascinating mind who thinks deeply about this world.
Well, what does he think about the Golden Girls?
To engineer it in order to maximize the possibility that humanity flourishes on this fun little planet of ours. Also, you may notice that in this conversation, my eye is red. That's from jiu-jitsu. And also, if I may say so, from a life well lived. This is the Lex Friedman podcast, supported. Please check out our sponsors in the description.
No, you can't say that.
It's Balaji Srinivasan. At the core of your belief system is something you call the prime number maze. I'm curious. We got to start there.
Sure.
We can start anywhere with mathematics. Let's go.
All right, great. A rat can be trained to turn at every even number or every third number in a maze to get some cheese. But evidently, it can't be trained to turn at prime numbers 2, 3, 5, 7, and then 11, and so on and so forth. That's just too abstract. And frankly, if most humans were dropped into a prime number maze, they probably wouldn't be able to figure it out either. They'd have to start counting and so on. Actually, pretty difficult to figure out what the turning rule is. Yet the rule is actually very simple. And so the thing I think about a lot is just how many patterns in life are we just like these rats and we're trapped in a prime number maze. If we had just a little bit more, cogitation, if we had, a little bit more cognitive ability, a little bit more, whether it's, brain machine interface or just better physics, we could just figure out the next step in that prime number maze. We could just see it, we could just see the grid, right? And that's what I think about. Like that's a big thing that drives me. Is figuring out how we can actually conceive, understand that prime number maze that we're living in.
To understand which patterns are just complex enough that they're beyond the limit of human cognition.
Yes.
And what do you make of that? Are the limits of human cognition a feature or a bug?
I think mostly a bug. I admire Ramanujan. I admire, Feynman. I admire these great mathematicians and physicists who were just able to see things that others couldn't. And just by writing it down.
Let's see how people hate me.
People talk about it's not the idea, it's execution, but that's for trivial ideas, for great ideas, for Maxwell's equations or Newton's laws or quantum electrodynamics or some of Ramanujan's identities. That really does bring us forward, especially when you can check them, you don't know how they work, right? You have the phenomenological, you don't have the theory underneath them. And then that stimulates the advancement of theory to figure out why is this thing actually working. That's actually, StatMech, arose in part from the kind of phenomenological studies that were basically being done where people are just getting steam engines and so on to work. And then they kind of abstracted out thermodynamics and so on from that, right? So the practice led to theory rather than vice versa. To some extent, that's happening in neural networks now, as you're aware, right? And I think that's so just something that's true and that works. If we don't know yet, that's amazing and it pulls us forward. So I do think that the limits are more of a fun thing.
Is there something that humans will never be able to figure out about our universe? About the theory, about the practice of our universe?
Yeah, people will typically quote Gödel's incompleteness for such a question. And there are things that are provably unknowable or provably unprovable. But I think you can often get an approximate solution. The Hilbert, Hilbert's problem is like, we will know, we must know. At least we should know that we can't know. Push to get at least an approximate solution. Push to know that we can't know. At least we push back that darkness enough so that we've lit up that corner of the intellectual universe.
Okay, let's actually take a bit of a tangent and explore a bit in a way that I did not expect we would. But let's talk about the nature of reality briefly. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Don Hoffman.
No, I don't. I know Roger Penrose has like this Road to Reality series for like basic physics here to everything we know. But go ahead.
It's even wilder. Yeah. In modern physics, there's the question of what is fundamental and what is emergent in this beautiful universe of ours. And there's a bunch of folks who think that space-time, as we know it, the four-dimensional space, is emergent. It's not fundamental to the physics of the universe. And the same, many argue, I think Sean Carroll is one of them, that time itself, the way we experience it, is also emergent. It's not fundamental to the way our universe works. Anyway, those are the technical term. I apologize for swearing. Those are the mind fucks of modern physics. But if we stroll along that road further, we get somebody like Donald Hoffman, who makes the evolutionary case that the reality we perceive with our eyes is not only an abstraction of objective reality, but is actually completely detached. Like we're in a video game, essentially, that's consistent between each, consistent for all humans, but it's not at all connected to physical reality. So it's an illusion.
It's like a version of the simulation hypothesis, is that it's
in a very distant way, but the simulation says that there's a sort of computational nature to reality, and then there's a kind of a programmer that creates this reality and so on. No, he says that we humans have a brain that is able to perceive the environment, and evolution has produced from primitive life to complex life on Earth, produced a kind of brain that doesn't at all need to sense the reality directly. Like this table, according to Donald Hoffman, is not there.
well. So
like not just as an abstraction, like we don't sense the molecules that make up the table, but all of this is fake.
interesting. So I tend to be more of a hard science person, right? And so so just on that, people talk about qualia. Like, is your perception of green different from my perception of green? And my counter argument that is, well, we know something about spectrum of light, and we can build artificial eyes. If we can build artificial eyes, which we can, they're not amazing, but you can do that. You can build artificial ears and so on. Obviously, we can build recording devices and for cameras and things like that. Well, operationally, the whole concept of your perception of green, you see green as purple, I see green as green, or what I call green, doesn't seem to add up because it does seem like we could do engineering, right? So the Hoffman thing, I get why people more broadly will talk about a simulation hypothesis because it's like Feynman and many others have talked about how math is surprisingly useful to describe the world. Like very simple equations give rise to these complex phenomena. Wolfram is also on this from a different angle with the cellular automata stuff. But
So suspicious how well it works.
yeah, but on the other hand, it's like it is. Yet we're still also in a prime number maze. There's things we just don't understand, and so
Also, within the constraints of the non-prime numbers, we find math to be extremely effective, surprisingly effective.
yeah, exactly. So maybe the math we have gets us through the equivalent of the even turns and the odd turns, but there's math we don't yet have that is more complex or more complex.
Despite all our age,
I know that gets like very abstract, but there are unsolved problems in physics. Like the condensed matter space, there's a lot of interesting stuff happening. My recollection, I may be out of date on this, like things like sonoluminescence, we don't know exactly how they work. And sometimes those things that are like at the edges of physics, in the late 1800s, I think Rutherford, somebody, I think it was Rutherford, said, basically all physics is being discovered, etc. That was obviously before quantum mechanics. That sort of edge case, people were looking at the Balmer and the Passion series and seeing, this weird thing, with the hydrogen spectrum, it was quantized, and that led to like the sort of phenomenological set of observations that led to quantum mechanics and everything. And sometimes they think the UAP stuff might be like that, right? People immediately go to aliens for UAP, like the unidentified aerial phenomena, right? People have been there's a surprising amount of stuff out there on this. The UK has declassified a bunch of material. Harry Reid, who's the senator, has talked about this. It's not an obviously political thing, which is good. It's something that is there something happening there, right? And people have thought for a long time that the UAP thing was a like American kind of counter propaganda to cover up their new spy planes that were spying over the Soviet Union, to make anybody who talked about them seem crazy and hysterical or whatever. But if the UAP thing is real, it could be atmospheric phenomena like the aurora borealis or the northern lights, but some things we don't understand. It could be something like the Balmer and Passion series, which were the observations of like emission spectra before quantum mechanics. So that's like another option as opposed to doesn't exist or little green men. It could be physics we don't understand yet. That's one possibility.
Do you think there's alien civilizations out there?
So there's a lot of folks who have kind of written and talked about. There's this, the Drake equation, which is like, the multiplying all the probabilities together. There's perhaps more sophisticated takes like the dark forest, which says that if the universe is like a dark forest, we're the dumb ones that aren't hiding our presence. There's one calculation I saw, I haven't reproduced myself, that basically says that the assumption that other civilizations would have seen ours is wrong, because when you have like a spherical radius for like the electromagnetic radiation that's leaving our planet, as that sphere gets larger and larger, it gets like smaller and smaller amounts of energy. So you get farther out, you're not getting enough photons or what have you to actually detect it. I don't know. Actually, I haven't looked into the math behind it, but I remember seeing that argument. So it's actually, it is possible that it's so diffuse when you go past a certain number of light years out that people that alien civilization wouldn't be able to detect it, right? That's another argument.
That's more basically about signals from
strength.
them, from us.
Yeah.
To be able to signals colliding enough to find the signal from the noise.
Right. Exactly.
Intelligent signal.
Yeah. Hansen has an article called "Rabbi Aliens." Maybe seen his thing, right? And so
he's been on this podcast.
Oh, great.
He's been.
I like him. He pushes boundaries in interesting ways.
In everybody. In all of the ways.
In all the ways, that's right. I like him overall. He's NASA too.
Rabbi Alien. So he has this interesting idea that the civilizations quickly learn how to travel close to the speed of light.
Right.
So we're not going to see them So they're here.
Yeah, that's possible. I mean, one of the things is, so here's, for example, a mystery that we haven't yet done, right? We haven't really figured out yet, which is abiogenesis in the lab, right? We've done lots of things where you can show macromolecules binding to each other. You can show, evidence for the so-called RNA world. Abiogenesis is to go from, like non-life to life, right, in the lab. You can show microevolution, obviously, with bacteria. You can do artificial selection on them. Lots of other aspects of, fundamental, biochemistry, origins of life stuff have been established.
To all the Asians out there who eat ramen, I don't know how you eat it with like not 4 fucking packages.
And the RNA world is the initial hypothesis. But to my knowledge, at least, we haven't actually seen abiogenesis demonstrated. Now, one argument is you need just like this massive world with so many different reps before that actually happens. And one possibility is if we could do atomic level, simulations of molecules bouncing into each other, it's possible that in some simulation we could find a path, a reproducible path to abiogenesis, and then just replicate that in the lab, right? I don't know, okay, but that seems to me to be like a mystery that we still don't fully understand, like an example of the prime number base, right?
One of the most fascinating mysteries.
One of the most important. Yep. Yeah. And again, there may be some biochemist who's like, oh, Boz, you didn't know about X, Y, and Z that happened in the abiogenesis field. I freely confess I'm not like au courant on it. The last thing I remember looking at it is
What's au courant mean?
Like up to the moment.
Oh, nice. That's a nice word.
That's
au courant.
Yeah, I'm probably mispronouncing it. But,
yeah. We'll edit it in post.
Sure.
Correctly with AI.
Yeah.
We'll copy your voice and it will pronounce it perfectly correctly.
Yeah.
In post.
One thing that I do think was interesting is Craig Venter a while back tried to make a minimum viable cell, where he just tried to delete all of the genes that were not considered essential, and so it's like a new life form. And this was like almost 20 years ago. So that thing was viable in the lab, right?
All right, folks. I don't know how much you read all this.
You kind of reverse engineer. So you're coming up.
Got 7 hours of podcasting. Learning about how fucking Jack Dorsey banned people.
Assumptions as to how that could come together.
All right, he sucks.
Like sort of stripped down minimum viable life forms, and so
we're running
low. Stuff here. You can see microevolution. You can see at the sequence level. If you do molecular phylogenetics, you can actually track back the bases. There's actually, so it's not like there's no evidence. There's a lot of tools to work with. So this, in my view, is a fascinating area, and actually also relevant to AI, because another form of abiogenesis would be if we were able to give rise to a different branch of life form, the silicon-based as opposed to carbon-based. To stretch the point. You give rise to something that actually does meet the definition of life for some definition of life. Right?
Well,
good
what
shit.
do you think that definition is for an artificial life form? Because you mentioned consciousness.
Yeah.
When will it give us pause that we created something that feels, by some definition or by some spiritual, poetic, romantic, philosophical, mathematical definition, that it is alive?
Right.
And we wouldn't want to kill it.
So, a couple of remarks on that. One is Francis Crick of Watson and Crick. Before he died, I think his last paper was published on something called the claustrum. Okay, and the thing is that
welcome. How you living?
Biology or any,
what up, brutal smug?
Are discouraged from going after the big.
What's good in your neck of the woods, my G? Hello. Hope you're amazing.
Big questions, right? But he proposed the claustrum is actually the organ that is the seat of consciousness. It's like this sheath that like covers the brain. And for mice, if you and again, I may be recollecting this wrong, so but you can look at it. My recollection is in mice, if you disrupt this, the mouse is like very disoriented, right? It's like it's the kind of thing which Watson and Crick were all about structure implies function, right? Found the structure of DNA, this amazing thing, and they remarked in this very understated way at the end of the paper that, well, obviously this gives a basis for how the genetic material might be replicated and error corrected, because lines and you copy paste, right? So he was a big structure function person, and that applies not just at the protein level, not just at the level of DNA, potentially also at the level of organs. Like colostrum is kind of this system integrating level, right? It's like the last layer in the neural network or something, you know. And so that's the kind of thing that I think is worth studying. So consciousness is another kind of big abiogenesis is a big question. The prime nerve maze consciousness is a big question.
Welcome.
Then definition of life, right? There's folks, there's.
How you living, doctor?
So this one is something I'd have to Google around, but there's a guy I think at Santa Fe Institute or something who had some definition of life. Like
Kicking ass, taking names, my friend. What's good in your neck of the woods?
I run my printer still. I'm printing out like a display revolver. It won't work, but I decided to do it twice the size, and this thing's fucking huge. I have the biggest iron.
There you go. That's excellent. How much longer till it prints?
Right now I'm printing the trigger guard and like the housing, the rest of the housing for the case, for the mechanisms and stuff. It says that it's estimated to be around 6 hours. I've got a few other things printed out, and they do take quite some time, but it's worth it.
Word dog. All right, you ready to learn about anti-gravity?
Anti-gravity? Actually, I'd be pretty interested in that.
Let's do it, baby. Here we go. This is Bob Lazar on the Joe Rogan Experience. Ready for doctor. I mean, literally, I have this thing pulled up for you. Here we go. Everybody shout out to doctor.
And we're live. First of all, cheers, gentlemen. Let's go hold the toast, relax. Bob, thank you very much for doing this. I really appreciate it. I understand that you've told the story many, many times. You've been grilled many, many times, and it's very stressful for you. So I really, really appreciate your time. For people who don't know the story, there is a documentary. Jeremy Corbell has a documentary out right now. It's called Bob Lazar, Area 51 and UFOs and flying saucers.
Bob Lazar, Area 51 and flying saucers.
Okay. I first heard your story decades ago. I told you last night when we went out to dinner. I've seen pretty much every interview you've ever given. I've followed the story incredibly closely. But for people who don't know the story, let's give them the bullet points. You used to work at Area 51. And Area 51, you went like, huh?
Well, we want to be accurate.
Okay.
Area S4.
S4. Okay.
It's about 15 miles south of Area 51.
Okay. You worked in how would you describe it?
I guess within the Area 51 compound, you can call that a subset of Area 51.
And you got that job. Before that, you were working.
Before that, I had worked at Los Alamos National Labs in New Mexico.
And you were involved in what kind of work?
Nuclear weapon development, physics. I mean, they do everything there.
So how do they approach you to say, hey, Bob, why don't you come on out to the Nevada desert?
Well, the way this went down was, at that time, it was 1982. I put a jet engine in my Honda, and Los Alamos put it on the front page of the paper. Los Alamos man, physicist at the lab, built this 200-mile-an-hour Honda jet car that I drove to work every day. So I was known in Los Alamos as the guy with the weird car, and you could hear it from a mile away. Anyway, the day that came out on the front page of the paper was the day Edward Teller, the father of the hydrogen bomb, was giving a lecture down there at the lab. And we didn't have much going on that day in our group, and I asked if I could go down there. And I went down there early, and Ed Teller was outside, leaning on a brick wall there and reading the front page of the paper. Now, this is a guy out of history, so I introduced myself. Hey, I'm the guy you're reading about there. And we talked for a little while, and it was cool. Fast forward to years later, I had moved out to Las Vegas and had, left Los Alamos and went on to other things, and I wanted to get back into the scientific community. I left to start other businesses and that sort of thing. So I sent resumes out, and one of them went out to Ed Teller and referenced our meeting, back in the day. And anyway, he remembered me and gave me a reference, somebody to contact at EG&G. And that's pretty much how it started.
So you get a phone call or a letter? Like, what do you get?
Well, I got what did I get? I got a letter initially, and went down for an interview probably a couple times, and it was down at EG&G Special Projects, which was at McCarran Airport at that time out in Las Vegas.
And did they give you any sort of job description of what you were applying for?
They said it was for, I can't remember exactly what they did. This was a long time ago, but I think it was advanced propulsion or something like that. Something relatively generic, and they said it's in a remote area. It's going to be some days on, some days off, and it was kind of not exactly a full-time job, but you might have to be out there for 2 weeks at a time and take 2 weeks off. So it was kind of the work schedule would be kind of broken up.
And did it seem attractive to you, or did it seem weird?
No, it really wasn't weird, because people that work at the test site, anybody that's familiar with the area up there, working at the nuclear test site or at the Tonopah test range north of there, that's typically how things go.
So you had known about it from the scientific community? Because the Area 51 at that time was
No, they didn't say anything about Area
classified.
51.
Okay, so
They just said it was in a remote location, and you just know it was up at the test site.
right.
So, but there was no mention of Area 51 at that time.
So they've done hundreds of nuclear tests in Nevada. The whole area was. There's giant chunks of Nevada that people.
Yeah, there's a big piece of Nevada, and it's split up into different areas. There's a nuclear test site. There's Area 51. There's the Tonopah test range north of that. There's little sub areas. There's areas where they test chemical weapons and things like that. So it's all broken up as a gigantic test area.
So take me back to first day on the job. You accept the job. They take you out there.
Yeah, it's the first day. Really, I didn't really get to see a whole lot. The first day was essentially just paperwork. That's when I flew into Area 51 proper, and I left McCarran Airport and flew what they call the Janet flights. Just
someday, kids.
Passenger plane.
Someday,
from Las Vegas
somebody's
to
gonna
Area
watch this
51.
fucking thing with me.
And it was really just
Today
going
is not that
through
day.
a mountain of paperwork that day.
Bob. Not our day, man.
Dynamic definition. But you're right that it's going to be a multi-feature definition. We might have a Turing test-like definition, frankly, which is just
Yo, dog.
humans agree it's alive, right? And that might, frankly, be the
Sorry.
optional definition.
But this time your account is not eligible.
Boundary
I don't
days,
know what you're
are they alive or not? Most people don't think they're alive, but they're more alive than a rock. In some
Well, I think in a world that we'll talk about today quite a bit, which is the digital world, I think the most fascinating, philosophically and technically, definition of life is life in the digital world.
Mhm.
So chatbots, essentially creatures, whether they're replicas of humans or totally independent creations, perhaps in an automatic way. I think there's going to be chatbots that would ethically be troubled by if we wanted to kill them. They would have the capacity to suffer. They would be very unhappy with you trying to turn them off. And then there would be large groups of activists that will protest, and go to the Supreme Court, or whatever the Supreme Court looks like, in 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And they will demand that these chatbots would have the same rights as us humans.
I saw that Google engineer who's basically saying this had already happened, and I was surprised by it because when I looked at the chat logs of it, it didn't seem particularly interesting. On the other hand, I can definitely see. I mean, GPT-3 for people who haven't paid attention shows that serious step-ups are possible, and obviously, you talk about AI in your podcast a ton. Is it possible that GPT-9 or something is kind of like that, or GPT-15 or GPT-4 maybe? But
for people just listening, there's a deep skepticism in your face.
yeah, the reason being because it's possible. It's possible that you have like a partition of society on literally this basis. That's one model where there's some people, just like there's vegetarians and non-vegetarians, right? There may be machines have life and machines are machines, or something like that, right? You could definitely imagine some kind of partition like that in the future where your fundamental political social system, that's a foundational assumption. And, is AI, does it deserve the same rights as like a human? Or, for example, a corporation is an intermediate. Do you see the thing which is how human are different corporations? Have you seen that infographic? It's actually funny.
Yeah,
so it's like
spectrum.
there's a spectrum. So, for example, Disney is considered about as human as like a dog, but like Exxon, I may be remembering this wrong, but they had like a level with like human at one end and like rock at the other.
Does it have to do with corporate structure? What
I think it's about people's empathy for that corporation, their brand identity. But it's interesting to see that, first of all, people sort of do think of corporations as being more or less, like the branding is really what they're responding
Well,
to.
that's what I mean. They're also responding. I have a brand of human that I'm trying to sell, and it seems to be effective for the most part.
Sure.
Although it has become like a running joke that I might be a robot.
Right.
Which means the brand is cracking. It's seeping through. But I mean, in that sense, I think I don't see a reason why chatbots can't manufacture the brand of being human, of being sentient.
I mean, that is the Turing test, but it's like the multiplayer Turing test. Now that actually a fair number of chatbots have passed the Turing test, I'd say there's at least two steps up, right? One is a multiplayer Turing test where you have chatbots talking to each other. And then you ask, can you determine the difference between chatbots talking to each other and clicking buttons and stuff in apps and humans doing that? I think we're very far off, or I shouldn't say very far off. At least, I don't know how far we are in terms of time. We're still far off in terms of a group of chatbots looking like their digital output is like the group of humans. It's like a go from the Turing test to the multiplayer Turing test. That's one definition. Another definition is, to be able to kind of swap in, and you're not just convincing one human that this is a human for a small, session. You're convincing all humans that this is a human for n sessions. Remote work actually makes this possible, right? That's another definition of a multiplayer Turing test, where basically you have a chatbot that's fully automated, that is earning money for you as an intelligent agent on a computer, that's able to go and get remote work jobs and so on. I would consider that next level, right? If you could have something that was like that, that was competent enough to, because everything on a computer can be automated, right? Literally, you could be totally hands-free, just like autonomous driving. You could have autonomous driving. As a challenge problem, if you were Microsoft or Apple and you had legitimate access to the operating system, just like Apple says, can you send me details of this bill? A decentralized thing could, in theory, log, the actions of 10,000 or 100,000 or a million people. And with cryptocurrency, you can even monitor a wallet that was on that computer. And you could see, what long-run series of actions were increasing or decreasing the digital balance. You see what I'm saying, right? So you start to get, at least conceptually, it'd be invasive and there'd be a privacy issue and so on. Conceptually, you could imagine an agent that could learn what actions humans were doing that resulted in the increase of their local cryptocurrency balance. Okay, there may be better ways to formulate it, but that I would consider a challenge problem is to go from the Turing test to a genuine intelligent agent that can actually go and make money. If you can do that, that's a big deal. People obviously have trading bots and stuff, but that would be the next level. It's typing out emails, it's creating documents,
So mimic human behavior in its entirety.
Yeah, that's right. And it'll schedule Zooms, it'll send emails, it'll essentially, because if you think about it, a human is hitting the keys and clicking the mouse, but just like a self-driving car, the wheel rotates by itself, right? Those keys are effectively just, it's like the automator app in Apple, right? Everything's just moving on the screen. You're seeing it there, and it's just an AI.
It's kind of hilarious that the I'm not a robot click thing actually works. So I actually don't know
How that's happening.
how it works, but I think it has to do with the movement of the mouse,
Yes.
the timing, and they know that it's very difficult currently for a bot to mimic human behavior in the way they would click that little checkbox.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's something. I mean, again, my recollection on that is it's like a pile of highly obfuscated JavaScript with all kinds. It looks like a very simple box, but it's doing a lot of stuff and it's collecting all kinds of instrumentation. And yeah, exactly like a robot is just a little too deterministic, or if it's got noise, it's like Gaussian noise, and the way humans do it is just not something that you used to be able to do without collecting thousands and thousands and thousands of human traces. But it is a predator
Look
prey.
at this.
Well, the
Very
computer,
athletic.
Millions of human traces.
Very,
the
very.
computer just uses JavaScript. It needs to be able to look outside the simulation. For the computer, the world is like
Right.
it doesn't. The computer doesn't know about the
Right.
physical world, so it has to look outside of its world and introspect on this simple box.
Right.
Which is kind of, I think that's exactly what mushrooms do, or like psychedelics, is you get to go outside and look back in.
Yeah,
That's what a
interesting.
computer needs to do.
I do wonder whether they actually give people insight or whether they give people the illusion of insight. Yeah, because actual insight, actual insight is again Maxwell's equations. You're able to shift the world with that. There's a lot of practical devices that work. The illusion of insight is I'm Jesus Christ and nothing happens, right? So those are quite different.
I don't know. I think you can take it till you make it on that one, which is insight in some sense is revealing a truth that was there all along.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess like I'm talking about technical insight, where you have this is the thing we were talking about actually before the podcast, like technical truths versus political truths, right? Some truths they're on a spectrum, and there's some truths that are actually entirely political in the sense that if you can change the software in enough people's heads, you change the value of the truth. For example, the location of a border is effectively consensus between large enough groups of people. Who is the CEO? That's consensus among a certain group of people. What is the value of a currency or any stock, right? That market price is just the psychology of a bunch of people. Like literally, if you can change enough people's minds, you can change the value of the border, or the position of the hierarchy, or the value of the currency. Those are purely political truths. Then all the way on the other end are technical truths that exist independent of whatever any one human or all humans think, like the gravitational constant, right, or the diameter of a virus. Those exist independent of the human mind. Change enough human minds doesn't matter. Those remain constant. And then you have things that are interestingly in the middle, where cryptocurrency has tried to pull more and more things from the domain of political truths into technical truths, where they say, okay, the one social convention we have is that if you hold this amount of Bitcoin, or that if you hold this private key, you hold this Bitcoin. And then we make that very hard to change. So you have to change a lot of technical truths. So you can push things to this interesting intermediate zone.
The question is how much of our world can we push into that?
Right.
And that takes us in a non-linear, fascinating journey to the question I wanted to ask you in the beginning, which is this political world that you mentioned, and the world of political truth. As we know it in the 20th century, in the early 21st century, what do you think works well, and what is broken about government?
The fundamental thing is that we can't easily and peacefully start new opt-in governments. And
Startup government.
yeah, and what do I mean by that is basically you can start a new company, you can start a new community, you can start a new currency even these days. You don't have to beat the former CEO in a duel to start a new company. You don't have to become head of the World Bank to start a new currency. Okay, because of this, yes, if you can, if you want to, you can join. I don't know. Microsoft or name some companies, GameStop, and you can try to reform it, okay? Or you can start your own. And the fact that both options exist means that you can actually just start from scratch. And that's the same reason we have a clean piece of paper, right? I've mentioned this actually in the Network State book. I'll just quote this bit, but we want to be able to start a new state peacefully for the same reason we want a bare plot of earth, a blank sheet of paper, an empty text buffer, a fresh start, or a clean slate, because we want to build something new without historical constraint, right? For the same reason you hit plus and do docs.new, like create a new doc. It's for the same reason, right? Because you don't have backspace, you don't have just like 128 bytes of space, 128 kilobytes, and just have to backspace the whole document before creating a new one. So that's a fundamental thing that's wrong with today's governance. And it's a meta reform, right? Because it's not any one specific reform, it's a meta reform of being able to start the countries.
Okay, so that's one problem, but there, you can push back and say that's a feature because a lot of people argue that tradition is power. In generation, if you try a thing long enough, which is the way I see marriage, there's value to the struggle and the journey you take through the struggle. You grow and you develop ideas together. You grow intellectually, philosophically together, and that's the idea of a nation that spans generations. That you have a tradition that becomes more that strives towards the truth and is able to arrive there, or no, not arrive, but take steps towards there through the generations. So you may not want to keep starting new governments. You may want to stick to the old one and improve it one step at a time. But just because you're having a fight inside a marriage doesn't mean you should get a divorce and go on Tinder and start dating around. That's the pushback. So it's not obvious that this is a strong feature to have.
Sure.
To launch.
There's several different kind of lines of attack or debate or whatever on this, right? First is, yes, there's obviously value to tradition, and people say this is Lindy and that's Lindy. It's been proven for a long time and so on. But of course, there's a tension between tradition and innovation. Like going to the moon wasn't Lindy. It was awesome, and like artificial intelligence is something that's very new. New is good, right? And this is a tension within humanity actually itself, because it's way older than all of these nations. I mean, humans are tens of thousands of years old. Ancestors of humans are millions of years old, right? And you go back far enough, and the time that we know today of the sessile farmer and soldier is, if you go back far enough, you want to be truly traditional, or actually descended from hunter-gatherers who were mobile and wandered the world, and there weren't borders and so on. They kind of went where they want, right? And people have had done historical reconstructions like skeletons and stuff like that, and many folks report that the transition to agriculture and being sessile resulted in diminution of height. People had like tooth decay and stuff like that. Skeletons, people had traded off upside for stability, right? That's what the state was. That was what these sessile kinds of things were. Now, of course, they had more likelihood of living consistently. You could support larger population sizes, but have lower quality of life, right? And so the hunter-gatherer era, maybe that's actually our collective recollection of the Garden of Eden, where people, just like a spider kind of knows innately how to build webs, or a beaver knows how to build dams. Some people theorize that the entire Garden of Eden is like a sort of built-in neural network recollection of this, pre-sessile era where we're able to roam around and just pick off fruits and so on, low population is. So the point is that I think what we're seeing is a V3. You go from the hunter-gatherer to the farmer and soldier, the sessile. Nations are here and they've got borders and so on, to kind of the V3, which is the digital nomad, the new hunter-gatherer. We're going back to the future because it's even older than nations is no nations, right? Even more traditional than tradition is, being international, right? And so we're actually tapping into that other huge thread in humanity, which is the desire to explore, pioneer, wander, innovate, and I think that's important.
To make America great again is to dissolve it completely into oblivion. No, that's a joke.
I see. Yeah, I know it's a joke, but well,
humor. I'm learning this new thing.
Yes, a new thing for the chatbot emulation isn't fully working.
Yeah, glitch. We're in the beta.
And let me say one other thing about this, which is, there are, everybody in the world. Let's say, I don't know what percentage. Let's say 99.99%, or it rounds to that number, of political discourse in the U.S. focuses on trying to fix the system. If those folks, 0.01% of the energy is going towards building a new system, that seems like a pretty good portfolio strategy, right? Or 100% are supposed to go and edit this code base from 200 something years ago. The most American thing in the world is going and leaving your country in search for a better life. America was founded 200 years ago by the founding fathers. It's not just a nation of immigrants; it's a nation of emigrants, right? Emigration, from other countries to the U.S. and actually also immigration within the U.S. There's an amazing YouTube video called it's like 50 states U.S. population. I think 1790 to it says 2050. So they've got a simulation, so you just stop it at 2019 or 2020. But it shows that like Virginia was like number one early on, and then it lost ground, and like New York gained, and then like Ohio was a big deal in the early 1800s, and it was like father of presidents and general presidents, and later Illinois and Indiana, and then California only really came up in the 20th century, like during the Great Depression, and now we're entering the modern era where like Florida and Texas have risen, and New York and California have dropped, and so interstate competition is actually just like intercurrency competition. You've got trading pairs, right? You sell BTC, buy ETH. You sell, Solana or Z, sell Monero, buy Zcash, right? Each of those trading pairs gives you signal for today on this currency is down or up relative to this other currency. In the same way, each of those migration pairs, someone goes from New York to Ohio, Ohio to California, gives you information on the desirability of different states. You can literally form a pairs matrix like this over time, very much like the link matrix. That's shaped America in a huge way. And so, you ask, if this nation of immigrants that was founded by men younger than us, by the way, the founding fathers were often in their 20s, right? Who, endorsed the concept of a proposition nation, who've given rise to a country of founders and pioneers, who've literally gone to the moon, right? Those folks would think that this is the end of history. That's it. We're done. Like we've done everything else. There's people in technology who believe, and I agree with them, that we can go to Mars. We might be able to end death. We can't innovate on something that was 230 years old.
So there is a balance certainly to strike. But the American experiment is fascinating, nevertheless. So one argument you can make is actually that we're in the very early days of this V2. So what you describe as V2, you could make the case that we're not ready for V3. That we're just actually trying to figure out the V2 thing. We're trying to skip.
When are we ever ready?
Now again, we'll go back to marriage, I think, and having kids kind of thing. I think everyone who has kids is never really ready to be kids. That's the whole point to dive in. Okay. But you mentioned that you can't watch it. Is there other criticisms of government that you can provide as we know it today before we kind of outline the ideas of V3? Let's stick to V2.
I'll give a few, right? And so a lot of this stuff will go into the version. So I've got, this book, The Network State, which covers some of these topics.
Does Network State have a subtitle?
It is The Network State, How to Start a New Country.
How to Start a New Country.
But I just have it at thenetworkstate.com.
I should say it's an excellent book that you should get. I read it on Kindle, but there's also a website. And Balaji said that is constantly working on improving it, changing it. By the time the whole project is over, it'll be a different book than it was in the beginning.
I think so.
Always shedding its old skin.
Well, I wanted to get something out there and get feedback and whatnot, just like an app, right? You have these two poles of an app is highly dynamic and you're accustomed to having updates all the time, and a book is supposed to be static. And there's a value in something static, something unchanged, and so on. But in this case, I'm glad I kind of shipped to version 1.0, and the next version, I'm going to split into tentatively motivation, theory, and practice. Like motivation, what is the sort of political philosophy and so on that motivates me at least to do this, which you can take or leave, right? And then theory as to why network state is now possible, and I can define it in a second. And then the practice is zillions of practical details and everything from roads, diplomatic recognition, and so on, funding, founding, all that stuff. A lot of the stuff actually I left out of V1 simply because I wanted to kind of get the desirability of it on the table and then talk about the feasibility.
I should actually linger on that briefly in terms of things we can revolutionize. One of the biggest innovations I think that Tesla does with the way they think about the car, the way they deploy the car. It's not the automation or the electric. To me, it's the over-the-air updates.
Mhm. Right.
Be able to send instantaneously updates to the software that completely changes the behavior, the UX, everything about the car. And so I do think it would be interesting because books are a representation of human knowledge, a snapshot of human knowledge. And it would be interesting that if we can somehow figure out a system that allows you to do sort of like a GitHub for books. Like if I buy a book on Amazon without having to pay again, can I get updates like V1.1, V1.2, and there's like release notes.
Right.
That would be incredible. It's not enough to do like a second edition or a third edition, but like minor updates. It's not just on your website, but actually go into the model that we use to buy books.
Right.
So I spend my money. Maybe I'll do a subscription service for $5 a month where I get regular updates to the books.
Right.
And there's an incentive for authors to actually update their books such that it makes sense for the subscription. And that means your book isn't just a snapshot, but it's a lifelong project.
Right. So
Care enough about the book.
So I think there's a lot that can be done there because actually, in going through this process, anyways, the most traditional thing I did was self-publish ebook on Kindle, right? Why? Because basically, like, if you actually ink a deal with a book publisher, first they'll give you some advance. I didn't need the advance or anything. The second is all these constraints. You want to translate into this, or you want to do this other format, or you want to update it. You have to go and now talk to this other party, right? And also the narrowing window of what they'll actually publish, it gets narrower and narrower. You see all these, meltdowns of very young adult novels and stuff on Twitter, but it's more than that. So, actually having an Amazon page, it's just like a marker that a book exists. Okay. And now I've got an entry point where if someone says, okay, I like this tweet, but how do I kind of get the, that might be a concept from like the middle of chapter 3, right? How do I get the thing from front to back? I can just go into the networkstate.com, that is, import this, right? This one entry point, okay? And you mentioned like a subscription and money and so on and so forth. And I think people are paying for content online now with newsletters and so on. But I've chosen to, and I will always have the thing free. And I want it on, or you can get the Kindle version on Amazon simply because you have to kind of set a price for that. But networkstate.com, what I want to do is have that optimized for every Android phone. So people in India or Latin America or Nigeria can just tap and open it. I'm going to do translations and stuff like that. Greg Foder of Allspace VR, founder of Allspace VR, he sold that and he coded the website and, worked with him on it. There's another designer who, Elijah, and it's basically just a 3-person group. And we thought we had something pretty nice. But one thing I was really pleasantly surprised by is how many people got in touch with us afterwards and asked us if we could open source the software to create this website, right? Because it's actually, you can try it on mobile. I think it's actually, in some ways, a better experience than Kindle. And so that was interesting because I do think of the website as like a V1 version of this concept of a book app, right? For example, imagine if you have the Bible and the 10 Commandments aren't just text, but there's like a checklist and there's a gateway to a Christian community there. And, the practice is embedded into the thing, like if Brilliant.org, amazing site. I love this site. Brilliant is basically mobile-friendly tutorials, and you can kind of just swipe through. You're in line at Starbucks or getting on a plane or something. You swipe through and just get really nice micro lessons on things, and it's just interactive enough that your brain is working and you're problem solving. And sometimes you'll need a little pen and paper, but that format of sort of very mobile-friendly, just continuous learning, I'd like to do a lot more with that. And so that's kind of where we're going to go with the book out.
So there's a lot of fun stuff about the way you did at least V1 with the book, which is you have like a 1-sentence summary, 1-paragraph summary, TLDR, and like 1 image summary, which is, I think honestly, it's not even about a short attention span. It's a really good exercise about summarization, condensation, and like helping you think through what is the key insight. like we mentioned, the prime number maze that reveals something central to the human condition, which is struggling against the limitation of our mind. And in that same way, you summarize the network state in the book. So let's actually jump right there, and let me ask you, what is the network state?
What is the network state? So I'll give it a sentence and I'll also give it an image, right? So the informal sentence, the network state is a highly aligned online community with a capacity for collective action that crowdfunds territory around the world and eventually gains diplomatic recognition from pre-existing states. Okay, so just taking those pieces, highly aligned online community. That is not Facebook. That is not Twitter. People don't think of themselves as Facebookers or Twitterians, right? That's just a collection of hundreds of millions of people who just fight each other all day, right? It's fight clubs. A company is highly aligned, where you'll put a task into the company Slack, and if you do an all hands, about 100% of the people in the company Slack will do it. So they're highly aligned in that way. But online communities don't tend to be highly aligned. Online communities tend to be like a Game of Thrones fan club or something like that. Or a Twitter account, you might get 0.1% of people engaging with something. It's not 100%. If you combine the degree of alignment of a company with the scale of a community, that's like what a highly aligned, online community is, right? Start to get 1,000 or 10,000 people who can collectively do something as simple as just all liking something on Twitter. For example, why would they do that? They're a guild of electrical engineers. They're a guild of graphic designers. And you've got 1,000 people in this guild, and every day somebody is asking a favor from the guild, and the other 999 people are helping them out. For example, I've just launched a new project, or I'd like to get a new job. Can somebody help me? And so on. And so you kind of give to get. You're helping other people in the community, and you're kind of building up karma this way. And then sometimes you spend it down. Like Stack Overflow has this karma economy. It's not meant to be an internal economy that is like making tons and tons of money off of. It's sort of keep score, right? That's a highly aligned online community. Then capacity for collective action, I just kind of described that, which is at a minimum, you don't have a highly aligned online community unless you have 1,000 people and you paste in a tweet and 1,000 of them RT it or like it. Okay, if you can't even get that, you don't have something. If you do have that, you have the basis for at least collective digital action on something. Okay, and you can think of this as a group of activists. You can think of it as, for example, let's say I mentioned a guild, but let's say they're a group that wants to raise awareness of the fact that life extension is possible, right? Every day there's a new tweet on, I don't know, whether it's Foreman research or Sinclair's work or David Sinclair, right? Andrew Huberman has good stuff here, or there's Longevity BC, there's a bunch of folks working in this area. Every day there's something there, and literally the purpose of this online community is raise awareness of longevity. And of the 1,000 people, 970 go and like that. That's pretty good, right? That's solid. You've got something, or you've got a laser, right? You've got something which you can focus on something, because most of the Web 2 internet is entropic. You go to Hacker News, you go to Reddit, you go to Twitter, and you're immediately struck by the fact that it's like 30 random things. Random. It's just a box of chocolates. It's meant to be,
Some of them look delicious.
Some of them look delicious. Novelty, we can overconsume novelty, right? So, where we were talking about earlier, the balance between tradition and innovation, right? Here is a different version of that, which is entropy going in a ton of different directions due to novelty versus like focus. It's like heat versus work. Heat is entropic and work forced along a distance. You're going in a direction, right? And so if those 30 links on the next version of Hacker News or Reddit or something like so brilliant, it's just that's leveling up. The 30 things you click, you just gain the skill as a function of that, right? So these kinds of online communities, I don't know what they look like. They probably don't look like the current social media. They just like, for example, I know this is a meta analogy, but in the 2000s, people thought Facebook for work would look like Facebook. And, David Sachs, founded and sold a company, Yammer, that was partially on the basis. It was fine as a $1 billion company. But Facebook for work was actually Slack, right? It looked different. It was more chat focused. It was less image focused and whatnot. What does the platform for a highly aligned online community look like? I think Discord is the transitional state, but it's not the end state. Discord is sort of chatty. The work isn't done in Discord itself, right? The cryptocurrency for tracking, or the crypto karma for sort of tracking people's contributions is not really done in Discord itself. Discord is not built for that. And I don't know what that UX looks like. Maybe it looks like tasks, maybe it looks something different. Okay.
So wait, let me linger on this. So you're actually some people might not be even familiar with Discord or Slack and so on. Even these platforms have like communities associated with them.
Yes.
Meaning the big like the meta community of people who are aware of the feature set and that you can do a thing. That this is a thing, and then you can do a thing with it. Discord, like when I first realized it, I think it was born out of the gaming world.
Yes.
It's like, holy shit, this is like a thing. There's a lot of people that use this.
Right.
There's also a culture that's very difficult to escape that's associated with Discord that spans all the different communities within Discord. Reddit is the same. Even though there's different subreddits, there's still, because of the migration phenomenon, maybe there's still a culture to Reddit and so on.
Yes.
So I'd like to sort of try to dig in and understand what's the difference between the online communities that are formed and the platforms on which those communities are formed.
Sure. Yes, it is. It is. So, for example, an office, a good design for an office is frequently you have, the commons, which is like the lunchroom or the gathering area. Then everybody else has a cave on the border they can kind of retreat to.
Cave in the comments. I love. By the way, I was laughing internally about the heat versus work. I think that's gonna stick with me. That's such an interesting way to see Twitter.
Yeah.
Like, is this heat or is this thread? Like, because there's a lot of stuff going on.
Right.
Is it just heat, or are we doing some like? Is there a directed thing that's
Exactly.
gonna be productive at the end of the day?
That's right.
Love it. Love it. See. I mean, anyway, the cave in the commons is really nice. So that has to do with the layout of an office.
That's right. And so you could think of many kinds of social networks as being on the cave and commons continuum. For example, Twitter is just all commons. The caves are just like individual DMs or DM threads or whatever, but it's really basically just one gigantic global public fight club for the most part, right? Then you have,
Or love.
well, some with love, but mostly fight. Or actually, it's
I love aggressively though.
yeah. I mean, the way I think, Twitter is like a cross between, a library and a civil war. It's something where you can learn, but you can also fight if you choose to fight, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's because of the common structure of it, it's a mechanism for virality of anything.
Yeah. So
You just described the kind of things that become viral.
yeah, meaning no offense to librarians, it's like a library and Liberia. Liberia was racked by civil war for many years, right?
Library is one of my favorite sets. One, just kidding. Jokes. I'm learning that's probably crossing the line for the engineers working on this humor module. Maybe take that down.
Yeah. We're just talking about. Oh yeah. So continue. Go ahead. Continue.
Twitter
Right?
is a common.
Yeah. So Twitter's a commons. Then Facebook is like it's got all these warrants and stuff. Facebook is very difficult to reason about, like privacy on that. And the reason is, I think it's easy to understand when something is completely public, like Twitter, or completely private, like Signal. And those are the only two modes, I think, in which one can really operate. When something is quasi-private, like Facebook, you have to just kind of assume it's public. Because if it's interesting enough, it'll go outside your friend network, and it'll get screenshotted or whatever and posted. And so, Facebook is sort of forced into default public, despite its privacy settings. For anybody who says something interesting, it's like you can figure out all their dials and stuff like that, but it's just hard to understand unless it's totally private or totally public, right? You have to basically treat it if it's totally public, it's not totally private. Okay, at least under a real name. I'll come back to soon. So you've got Twitter, that's total commons. Facebook, which is like a warrens, it's like rabbit warrens or like an ant colony where you don't know where information is traveling. Then you've got Reddit, which has sort of your global Reddit and then all the subreddits. That's a different model of cave and commons. I think one of the reasons it works is that you have individual moderators where something is totally off topic and acceptable, totally off topic and unacceptable in this subreddit, and totally on topic and acceptable in another. That's like kind of a, precursor of the digital societies that we're going to see that actually have become physical societies. Like lots and lots of subreddit-like things, have become physical societies. Then you start going further into like Discord, where it's more full featured than as you go Twitter, Facebook, Reddit. Now you jump into Discord, and Discord is a bunch of individual communities that are connected, and you can easily sort of jump between them, right? Then you have Slack, and yes, you can use Slack to go between different company Slacks, but Slack, historically at least, I'm not sure what their current policy is, historically they discourage public Slacks. So it's mostly like you have your main Slack for your company, and then you sometimes may jump into like let's say you've got a design consultant or something like that, you'll jump into their Slack. But Discord you've got way more Discords usually that you jump into than Slacks, right?
Well, yeah, and let me ask you then on that point, because there is a culture. One of the things I discovered on Reddit and Discord of anonymity or pseudonyms or usernames
Yes.
that don't represent the actual name. On Slack is an example of one. I think I used to have a Slack for like deep learning course that I was teaching, and that was like very large, like 20,000 people, whatever. But so you could grow quite large, but there was a culture of like, I'm going to represent my actual identity, my actual name. And then the same stuff on Discord. I think I was the only asshole using my actual name on there. It's like everybody was using pseudonyms. So what's the role of that in the online community?
Well, so I actually gave a talk on this a few years ago called the Pseudonymous Economy. Okay. And it's come about faster than I expected, but I did think it was going to come about fairly fast. And essentially the concept is obviously we had, so first, anonym, pseudonym, real name, right?
Can you describe the difference?
Anonymous is like 4chan, where there's no tracking of a name. There's zero reputation associated with an identity, right? Pseudonymous is like much of Reddit, where there's a persistent username, and it has karma over time, but it's not linked to the global identifier that is your state name, right? So your quote real name, even the term real name, by the way, is a misnomer because it's like your social security name, like social security number. It's your official government name. It's your state name. It is the tracking device. It's an air tag that's put on it, right? Why do I say that, right? Another word for a name is a handle. And so just visualize like a giant file cabinet. There's a handle with Lex Friedman on it that anybody, the billions of people around the world can go up to, and they can pull this file on you out. Images of you, things you said, like billions of people can stalk billions of other people now. That's a very new thing. And I actually think this will be a transitional era in like human history. We're actually going to go back into a much more encrypted world.
Okay, let me linger on that because
Sure.
Another way to see real names is the label on a thing that can be canceled.
Yes, that's right. In fact, there's a book called Seeing Like a State, which actually talks about the origins of surnames and whatnot. Like, if you have a guy that guy with brown hair, that's like an analog identifier. It could be in 10 different people in the village. But if you have a first name, last name, okay, that guy can now be conscripted. You can go down with a list of digital identifiers. Pull that guy out, pull him, into the military for conscription, right? So that was like one of the purposes of names was to make masses of humans legible to a state, right? Hence seeing like a state, you can see them now, right? See, digital identifiers, like one thing that people don't usually think about is pseudonymity is itself a form of decentralization. So, people know Satoshi Nakamoto was pseudonymous. They also know he's decentralization. But one way of thinking about it is, let's say his real name, okay, or his state name is a node, okay? Attached to that is every database, his Gmail, his, Facebook if he had one, every government record on him, right? All of these databases have that state name as the foreign key, right? And so it can go and look things up in all of those databases, right? And so I think of it as being the center of a giant network of all of these things. When you go and create a pseudonym, you're butting off a totally new node that's far away from all the rest. And now he's choosing to attach Bitcoin Talk and Bitcoin.org and the GPT signatures of the code, if you should choose to do that. All those things, digital signatures, are all attached to this new decentralized name because he's instantiating it, not the government, right? One way of thinking about it is the root administrator of the quote real name system is the state because you cannot simply edit your name there, right? You can't just you can't log into USA.gov and backspace your name and change it. Moreover, your birth certificate, all these stuff, that's fixed and immutable, right? Whereas we take for granted that on every site you go to, you can backspace, you can be like, call me Ishmael, walk into a site, you use whatever name you want. You have to use the same name across multiple sites, you can do that. And if not, you don't have to. One thing that we're seeing now actually is at the level of kids, the younger generation. Eric Schmidt several years ago mentioned that, people would like change their names when they became adults so that they could do that. This is kind of already happening. People are using, I've remarked on this many years ago, search resistant names. Okay, why? They have their Finsta, which is their quote fake name Instagram, and Rinsta, which is their real name Instagram. Okay, and what's interesting is on their Rinsta, they're their fake self because they're in their Sunday best and smiling, and this is the one that's meant to be search indexed, right? On the Finsta, their fake name, this is just shared with their closest friends. They're their real self, and they're hanging out at parties or whatever, And so this way, they've got something which is a public persona and a private persona, right? The public persona that's search indexed, and the private persona that is private for friends, right? And so organically, people are, like Gene Jacobs, who talks about like cities and how they're organic and whatnot. Like some of the mid 20th century guys, the architecture they had removed shade from like awnings and stuff like that got removed. So this is like the restoration of like awnings and shade and structure, so that you're not always exposed to the all-seeing web crawler that I have Sauron, which is like Googlebot, just indexing everything. These are search-resistant identities, and that like eye just sort of passes over you, like the Terminator, like in the Terminator eye just kind of passes over you, right? So search-resistant identity is not pulled up, it's not indexed, right? And now you can be your real self. And so we've had this kind of thing for a while with communication. The new thing is that cryptocurrency has allowed us to do it for transaction, hence the pseudonymous economy, right? And you go from anonymous, pseudonymous, real name. These each have their different purposes. But the new concept is that pseudonym. You can have multiple of them, by the way. Your ENS name, you can have it under your quote real name or state name, like Scraven.eth. But you can also be punk6529. Okay. And now you can earn, you can sign documents, you can boot up stuff, you can have a persistent identity here, okay, which has a level of indirection to your real name. Why is that very helpful? Because now it's harder to both discriminate against you and cancel you. Concerns of various factions are actually obviated, or at least partially addressed, by going pseudonymous as default, right? It is the opposite of bring your whole self to work. It's bring only your necessary self to work, right? Only show those credentials that you need, right? Now, of course, anybody who's in cryptocurrency understands Satoshi Nakamoto and so on is for this. But actually, many progressives are for this as well. Why? Ban the boxes. It's like you're not supposed to ask about like felony convictions when somebody is, being hired because they've served their time, right? Or you're not supposed to ask about immigration status or marital status in an interview. People have this concept of blind auditions where, if a woman is auditioning for like a violin seat, they put it behind a curtain so they can't downgrade, her for playing. So her performance is judged on the merits of its audible quality, not in terms of who this person is. So this way they don't discriminate versus male or female for who's getting a violin position. So you combine those concepts like ban the box, not asking these various questions, blind auditions, and then also the concept of implicit bias. Like if you believe this research, people are unconsciously biased towards other folks, right? Okay, so you take all of that, you take Satoshi, and you put it together, and you say, okay, let's use pseudonyms. That actually takes unconscious bias even off the table, right? Because now you have genuine global equality of opportunity. Moreover, you have all these people, billions of people around the world that might speak with accents, but they type without them. And now if they're pseudonymous, you aren't discriminating against them, right? Moreover, with AI, very soon, the AI version of Zoom, you'll be able to be whoever you want to be and speak in whatever voice you want to speak in, right? And that'll happen in real time.
This is really interesting. For Finsta and Rinsta, there's some sense in which the fake Instagram you're saying is where you can be a real self. Well, my question is under a pseudonym or when you're completely anonymous, is there some sense where you're not actually being your real self? That as a social entity, it is human beings are fundamentally social creatures.
Mhm.
And for us to be social creatures, there is some sense in which we have to have a consistent identity that can't be canceled, that can be criticized or applauded in society, and
Right.
that identity persists through time. So, is there some sense in which we would not be our full, beautiful human selves unless we have a lifelong, consistent, real name attached to us in the digital world?
So this is a complicated topic, but let me make a few remarks. First is real names, quote unquote state names, were not built for the internet. They're actually state names, right? It's actually a great way to think about social security, right? So your state name, your official name, was not built for the internet. Why? They give both too much information and too little. Okay, so too much information because someone with your name can find out all kinds of stuff about you. Like, for example, if someone doesn't want to be stalked, right? The real name is out there. The stalker knows it. They can find address information, all this other kind of stuff, right? And with all these hacks that are happening, just every day we see another hack, massive hack, etc. That real name can be indexed into data that was supposed to be private, right? Like, for example, the Office of Personnel Management, like the government, the U.S. government, many governments actually, are like a combination of the surveillance state and the Keystone Cops, right? Why? They slope up all the information and then they can't secure it, so it leaks out the back door. Okay, they basically have 100 million records of all this 300 million records, all this very sensitive data. They just get owned, hacked over and over again, right? So really, there should be something which totally inverts the entire concept of KYC and what have you.
I fucking
and of course,
hate
apply the
Instagram. It
regulations
sucks.
as they are currently written. But also, you should argue privacy
The
over
worst.
KYC. The government
Look at this
should
move.
but it can't secure.
Oh,
All this information.
like a
It's
cat.
completely unable to secure it. It's
Blah.
hacked over and over again.
Did you see this athleticism to go from all the way over there to here?
And some of these hacks are
Well, I finally know what the fucking speed of light is. It's 300,000 kilometers
And so, what happens is
per second.
criminals can just run this stuff and find, okay, so that guy
Is that
has got
true?
that net worth online.
I don't think anybody fucking knows. Super fast though.
So, in that sense, real names were not.
Is that just your opinion?
Just
Actually, that's
information
true.
in
Some
our
people might consider
actually
it not
existing
that
internet
fast.
environment we go to.
Could have been faster. Could have been
But
like
they also need too little. Why?
400,000
If instead you
meters
got,
per second squared.
LexFriedman.eth,
Huh?
okay,
No, just
or a similar
not
crypto domain name, or urban
kilometers
name,
per
or something like that.
second.
Now that's
Was
actually
it
more
per
like
second?
DNS. Okay, first, if you've got it, LexFriedman.eth, what can you do that? Some you can do today, some you'll soon be able to do. You can pay LexFriedman.eth, you can message LexFriedman.eth, you can look it up. Like
Yo, dog, how
profile.
fast is
You
the
can
speed of light
send files to it
in
You can
kilometers?
download. Basically, it combines aspects of an email address,
Yeah, it's like 300,000.
a
That's
website,
tight.
a username.
So that means I could
can
travel
say,
from
hey,
like
go from email to phone number to DNS address or something like that as the primary online identifier. Because
this
is
dick to
actually a
Uranus
brandable
and like
name, right? Whereas a state name is not. Think
so
about it,
quickly
like a
it'll make your
single
head
apostrophe
spin.
is perhaps
Oh, this
or
is the
is that
worst,
middle name, or isn't that
worst
that was the format that was
stream
built for the paper
ever.
world, right? Whereas the ENS name is built for the online. Now, the reason say ENS or something like it, some
Man, I gotta take a whiz.
village built, their name might be Smith because they were a blacksmith, or Potter because they were a potter, right? And the same, I think, your surname, right now, for many people, it's .eth, and that reflects the Ethereum community. Your surname online will carry information about you. Like .sol says something different about you. .btc says yet something different. They were going to have a massive fractionation of this over time. We're still in the very
What
early
up, girl?
stages of our internet
What up,
civilization,
Mallory?
right? 100,
How do you
200
like-
years from now, those
how do you like my
surnames may be
spam, baby?
say Chen or Friedman or
Love it.
something awesome
That
in
bitch
terms of
loves it.
what information they carry. Because the protocol, the civilization fundamentally that you're associated
I have to take a
with.
Right,
shit.
so there's
Oh,
some
dude,
improvement
maybe.
with the real name that you could do in
Pooch
the
man.
digital world. But do you think there's value
I
in
have to
having
fucking-
names that
There's like a rabbit
exist
in
for
no smell.
whole life
Anyway,
that
this is the
share
worst.
between all the different digital
This is the
I think you should
absolute
go-
worst
I
fucking
think you should
stream
go
I've
with
ever seen. Just
right?
and which
terrible.
At which level? In terms of the society that you're joining.
wait a minute.
It's just
Can I
worse.
murder a bunch of people
Well,
in
calm down.
society one and then go to society two and be like, I'm murder free. My
No,
my name is
I don't mean it like that. No, yeah. So,
but you know,
just by the way,
that's the application I'm interested in.
okay. Well,
So
I'm
what
not
what
saying
what
murder
resistance?
application, but
Well,
I don't know.
I would like you to
Take that
prevent
box.
me,
Sure,
that person who's clearly bad for society,
Sure.
from doing that.
sure. Murder is going to be against the rules in almost every society, and basically, people will argue. Yeah, most likely, right? And the reason I
Except
think that
animals.
Well, I'm thinking of like the Aztecs or the Mayas.
This
or,
is the
you know,
worst.
like
I got a
various,
whiz, man.
you know, Soviet Union. There's weird not edge cases. Yeah, there's societies unfortunately that
Oh, man.
have actually. That's why I asked this. But let's say
Let's try this fucking
is,
thing. Let's see if it works.
something that
Hey, Zucker
society one
douche.
probably has effectively a
Zucker
social
douche.
smart contract or a social contract that says that's illegal, therefore you're in jail, therefore you're
Sucks.
deprived of the right to exit. But upon entry into that society, in theory, you would have said, okay, I accept this quote social contract, right? Obviously, if I kill somebody, I can't leave. Okay, so you've accepted upon crossing the border into there, right? Now, as I mentioned, like what is murder? Like people will, there's an obvious answer, but as I said, there's been human sacrifice in some societies. Communism, they kill lots of people. Nazism, they kill lots of people. Unfortunately, there's quite a lot of societies. I wanted to say it's an edge case, but maybe many of the 20th century societies around the world have institutionalized some kind of murder, whether it's the Red Terror, the Soviet Union, or obviously the Holocaust, or the Cultural Revolution, or Year Zero, and so on and so forth, right? So my point there is that who's committing all those murders? It's the state, it's the organization that one is implicitly trusting them to track them, right? And how do they commit these murders? Well, how did Lenin, the hanging order? I'm talking about the hanging order for the kulaks.
Yes.
Okay, the famous hanging order, which actually showed they were actually bloodthirsty. The key thing was he said, here's a list of all the quote rich men, the kulaks, go and kill them. The real names, the state names were facilitated the murder. They didn't prevent the murderers, right? So my point is, just in the ethical weighting of it, it's a two-sided thing, right? You're right that the tracking can, prevent disorganized murders, but the tracking facilitates, unfortunately, organized murders. Lists of undesirables were the primary tool of all of these oppressive states in the 20th century. You see my point?
I see your point, and it's a very strong point. In part, it's a cynical point, which is that the rule of a centralized state is more negative than positive.
I think it's like nuclear energy. Okay, it's like fire. It is something which you're going to keep having it reform because there's good reasons where you have centralization, decentralization, re-centralization. But power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and you just have to be very suspicious of this kind of centralized power. The more trust you give it, often the less trust it deserves. It's like a weird feedback loop, right? The more trust, the more it can do. The more it can do, the more bad things it will do.
So, okay. There is a lot of downside to the state being able to track you.
Right.
And history teaches us lessons when at a large scale, especially in the 20th century, at the largest scale, a state can commit a large amount of murder and suffering.
And by the way, history isn't over. If you think about what the Chinese are building on this, right? That surveillance state, it's not just tracking your name, it's tracking everything. Like WeChat is essentially like it is all the convenience and none of the freedom.
So that's the downside. But the question is about, I think probably fundamentally about the human nature of an individual, of how much murder there would be if we can just disappear every time we murder.
Well,
at the individual level.
So the issue is basically like once one realizes that the moral trade-off has two poles to it, right? And moreover, that basically centralized organized murder has. I mean, if we add up all the disorganized murder of the 20th century, it's probably significantly less than the organized murder that these states facilitated, right? And probably by R.J. Rummel has this thing called democide, right? The thing is, it's so grim, right? Because it's saying like one death is a tragedy, a million is a statistic, right? These are just incalculable tragedies that we can't even understand. But nevertheless, engaging with it, I don't know, is the ratio 10x? Is it 100x? I wouldn't be surprised if it's 100x.
Yeah, but have you seen the viciousness, the negativity, the division within online communities that have anonymity?
So that's the thing. Basically, there's also a Scylla and a Shura of this. I'm not, when you see what centralization can do, and you correct in the direction of decentralization, you can overcorrect with decentralization and you get anarchy. And this is basically, then you want to re-centralize, and this is the I think it's the Romance of the Three Kingdoms. The empire long united must divide. The empire long divided must unite. That's always the way, right? So what's going to happen is we will state certain verbal principles, right? And then the question is where in state space you are. Are you too centralized? Well, then, okay, you want to decentralize. And are you too centralized? Then we want to centralize and maybe track more, right? And people will opt into more tracking because they will get something for that tracking, which is a great use of societal skill. So it's kind of like saying, are we going north or south? And the answer is like, what's our destination? Where's our current position in the civilizational state space?
Well, my main question, I guess, is does creating a network state escape from some of the flaws of human nature? The reason you got Nazi Germany is a large-scale resentment of the different explanations for that resentment that's ultimately lives in the heart of each individual that made up the entirety of Nazi Germany, and had a charismatic leader that was able to channel that resentment into action, into actual policies, into actual political and military movements. Can't you not have the same kind of thing in digital communities as well?
Have you heard the term argumentum ad Hitlerum, or like Godwin's law, or something like? It's something where if the reference point is Hitler, it's this thing where a lot of things break down. But I do think, I mean, look, is there any? Did Bitcoin manage to get where it was without a single shot being fired? To my knowledge, yes, right. Did Google manage to get to where it is without shots being fired? Absolutely. And
while a lot of shots were being fired elsewhere in the world.
Sure. Yes, sir. But who's firing those shots?
The states,
right? Yeah.
But that's because Bitcoin and Google are a tiny minority of communities. It's like the icing on the cake of human civilization.
Sure. Basically, any technology. I mean, like you can use a hammer to go and hit somebody with it, right? I'm not saying every technology is equally destructive or what have you, but you can conceive of it. It's kind of like Rule 34, but for technology, right? Right? You can probably figure out
your ability to reference brilliant things throughout is quite admirable. Yes. But anyway, sorry, Rule 34 for technology.
Rule 34, but for abusive technology, you can always come up with a Black Mirror version of something. And in fact, there is this kind of funny tweet, which is like a sci-fi author. My book, The Torment Nexus, was meant to be a cautionary tale on what would happen if society invented the torment nexus. And then it's like, heck, guys, at long last, we have created the torment nexus, right? And so the thing is that simply describing something, some abuse, unfortunately, after the initial shock wears off, people will unconsciously think of it as sort of an attractor in the space, right? It's like, I'll give you some examples, like, Minority Report had the gesture thing, right? And the Kinect was based on that. So it's a dystopian movie, but had this cool kind of thing, and people, kind of keyed off it, right? Or people have said that movies like, Full Metal Jacket, that was meant to be, in my understanding, is meant to be like an anti-war movie, but lots of soldiers just love it, despite the fact that the drill sergeant was actually depicted as a bad guy, right? For the sort of portrayal of that, kind of environment, right? So I'm just saying, it's like giving the vision of like the digital Hitler or whatever. It's not actually a vision I want to paint. I do think everything is possible. Obviously, ISIS uses the internet, right? Like,
yeah, I'm not bringing up Hitler in a shallow argument. We're bringing up Hitler in a long, empathetic, relaxed discussion.
Sure,
different, which is where Hitler can live in a healthy way. There's deep lessons in Hitler and Nazi Germany, as there is with Stalin. Yes.
Okay, so in many ways, and this is a very superficial way of talking about it, but this is exit is the anti-genocide technology, right? Because exit is the route of the politically powerless. Exit is not. People always say, "Oh, exit is for the rich," or that's actually not true. Most immigrants equals most immigrants are not rich. They're politically powerless.
You can describe the exit.
What is exit? So there's this book which I reference a lot. I like it, called "Exit, Voice, and Loyalty" by Albert Hirschman. Okay, and he essentially says, and I get this talk in 2013 that goes through this at YC Start School. But just to describe these, voice is reform, exit is alternatives. For example, in the context of an open source project, voice is submitting a bug, and exit is forking. In a company, voice is you're saying, hey, here's a ticket, okay, that I'd like to get solved, and exit is taking your business elsewhere, okay. At global corporate governance, voice is board of directors vote, and exit is selling your shares, right? In a country, voice is a vote, and exit is migration, okay. And I do think that the two forces we talk about a lot, democracy and capitalism, are useful forces. But there's a third, which is migration, right? So you can vote with your ballot, you can vote with your wallet, you can vote with your feet. Wallet has some aspects of exit built into it. But voting with your feet actually has some aspects of voice built into it, because when you leave, it's like an amplifier on your vote. You might say 10 things, but you actually leave, then people take what you said seriously. You're not just like complaining or whatever. You actually left San Francisco because it was so bad on this and this issue, and you actually voted with your feet. It is manifest preference as opposed to stated preference. So voice versus exit is this interesting dichotomy. Do you try to reform the system, or do you exit it and build a new one, or seek an alternative? And then loyalty modulates this, where if you are a patriot, as part of the initial part of your conversation, right? Like, are you a traitor? You're giving up on our great thing or whatever, right? And it will push those buttons to get people to stay. That's like, I just a bad version. Let's say a common version. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. But then there's the good version, which is, maybe the price is down right now, but you believe in the cause. So even if they're, on paper, you would rationally exit. You believe in this thing, and you're going to stick with it. Okay. So loyalty can be, again, good or bad, but it kind of modulates the trade-off between voice and exit. Okay. So given that framework, we can think of a lot of problems in terms of, am I going to use voice or exit or some combination? Because they're not mutually exclusive. It's kind of like, left and right substitutes use both together. I think that one of the biggest things the internet does is it increases
Zuckerberg, this shit working?
And therefore increases exit.
I'm too busy planning a fucking disco party for Priscilla.
On every phone, you can pick between Lyft and Uber, right? When you're at the store, you see a price on a shelf and you can compare the shelf, right? If it's Tinder, you can swipe, right? If it's Twitter, flip over to the back button is exit.
Oh, that is so fucking funny. It's my family's here.
This is like one of the fundamental things that the internet does. It puts this tool on your desktop, and now you can go and talk to an illustrator, or you can
It's my family,
right, by typing in some characters into Dolly,
And that makes the positive forces of capitalism more efficient. Increase in microeconomic leverage.
and it's individual empowerment, right? And so our sort of industrially systems were not set up for that level of individual empowerment. Just to give you like one example, I think about. We take for granted every single website. You go and log in, you can configure your Twitter profile, and you can make it dark mode or light mode, and your name, all this stuff is head, right? How do you configure your USA experience? Is there a USA.gov that you edit? Can you even edit your name there?
Dark mode. For USA.
Just your profile. Is there like a profile?
That's so funny. It's my family's here.
Quite in that way, right? Of course, you can move around your house and stuff like that, but it's not like your experience of the US is like configurable.
Let me think about that. Let me think about the analogy of it. So the microeconomic leverage to switch apps, to switch your experience in small ways efficiently multiple times a day inside the United States.
The physical world.
Under the constraints of the physical world, do like micro migration.
So this is coming back to the hunter-gatherer, farmer-soldier, digital nomad kind of thing, right? The digital nomad combines aspects of the V1 and the V2 for V3, right? Because the digital nomad has the ability and freedom of the hunter-gatherer, but some of the consistency of the civilization of the farmer and soldier, right? But coming back to this, like, one other thing about it is, in the 1950s, a guy in an assembly line might literally push the same button for 30 years. Okay. Whereas today, you're pushing a different key every second. Right? That's like one version of like microeconomic leverage. Another version is, in the 1980s, they didn't have Google Maps, right? So you couldn't just like discover things.
They didn't. We didn't, motherfucker.
Do, home to work and work to
Thompson
home to work. And a trip contained within a region of space, or you do home to school, school to home, home to school. It wasn't like you went and explored the map. Most people didn't, right? They were highly canalized, okay? Meaning, that it was just back and forth, very routine, just like the push the button, trapped within this very small piece, and also trapped within this large country because it was hard to travel between countries. Again, of course there were vacations, of course there was some degree of news and so on. Your mobility wasn't completely crushed, but it was actually quite low, okay, relatively speaking. Just you were trapped in a way that you weren't even really thinking about, okay? And now that map is opened up. Now you can see the whole map. You can go all over the place. I don't have the data to show it, but I'd be shocked if the average person didn't go to more places, wasn't, doing more, going to more restaurants and things like that today than they were in the 80s, simply because the map is open, okay?
And the map is made more open through the digital world.
The digital world, exactly. So we're reopening the map like the hunter-gatherer, okay? Because you can now think about every site for very low cost that you can visit, right? The digital world, how many websites have you visited? I don't know, hundreds of thousands probably at this point over your life, right? How many places on the surface of the earth? You're actually unusual. You might be like a world traveler, right? But still, even your physical mobility is less than your digital mobility, right? You can just essentially, the entire concept of like nations and borders and whatnot didn't exist in the hunter-gatherer realm, right? Because you couldn't build permanent fortifications and whatnot. Even nations as we currently think of them with like demarcated borders, you needed cartography, you needed maps, right? That stuff didn't exist for a long time. You just had sort of a fuzzy area of we kind of controlled this territory and these guys are on the other side of the river, okay?
I think
I don't want to digress too much, but yeah.
Where to digress away, I think the entirety of life on Earth is a kind of a digression, which creates beauty and complexity as part of the digression. I think your vision of the network state is really powerful and beautiful. I just want to linger on this
Let's talk about it.
real name issue.
Yes, real.
Let me just give you some data.
Go ahead.
A personal anecdotal experience data. There's a reason I only do this podcast in person. There is something lost in the digital space.
Oh, sure.
And I find, now I personally believe, to play devil's advocate against the devil's advocate that I'm playing, I personally believe that this is a temporary thing. We will figure out technological solutions to this, but I do find that currently people are much more willing to be on scale cruel to each other online than they are in person. The way to do that, just as Ukraine went to the front, the way you can have people be cruel to each other in the physical space is through the machinery of propaganda that dehumanizes the other side,
right?
All that kind of stuff. That's really like hard work to do. Online, I find just naturally at the individual scale, people somehow start too easily engage in the drug of mockery, derision, and cruelty.
Yes.
When they can hide behind anonymity. I don't know what that says about human nature. I ultimately believe most of us want to be good and have the capacity to do a lot of good, but sometimes it's fun to be shitty, to shit on people, to be cruel. I don't know what
weird.
that is.
It's weird because I think, one of my sayings is, just like the internet increases microeconomic leverage, the internet increases variance. For anything that exists before, you have, the 0 and 100 versions of it. I'll give some examples and I'll come to this. For example, you go from the 30-minute sitcom to the 30-second clip or the 30-episode Netflix binge, right? You go from guy working 9 to 5 to guy who's the 40 years old and has failed to launch, hasn't doesn't have a job or anything, and the 20-year-old tech billionaire. Okay, you go from all kinds of things that were sort of Gaussian or kind of constrained in location to kind of extreme outcomes on both sides. Okay, and applying that here, you are talking about the bad outcome, which I agree does happen, where the internet, in some sense, makes people have very low empathy between others. But it also is the other extent where people find their mental soulmates across the world. Someone who's living in Thailand or in, like Latin America, who thinks all the same stuff, just like them. Wow, you've never met this person before, right? You get to know them online, you meet in person, it's like, the brains have been communicating for 2 years, 3 years, you've been friends, and you see them in person, it's just great, right? So it's not just the total lack of empathy, it is
frankly, far more empathy than you would be able to build usually with an in-person conversation in the 80s or the 90s with someone on their side of the world, because you might not even be able to get a visa to go to their country or not even know they existed. How would you be able to find each other and so on and so forth, right? So it is kind of both. It is tearing society apart and it's putting it back together, both at the same time.
My main concern is this. What I see is that young people are for some reason more willing to engage in the drug of cruelty online under the veil of anonymity.
That's what you're seeing publicly, but you're not seeing the private chats. Like this is kind of it's a
Well, I work for the intelligence agency,
okay.
so
You do private chats.
I'm collecting all of your data. Yes, but you can intuit stuff, and I don't think I'm being very selective. I mean, if you just look at the young folks, I mean, I am very concerned about the intellectual, psychological growth of young men and women.
So I'm not disagreeing with you on this. I am saying, however, there is a positive there that once we see it, we can try to amplify that.
Yes, with technology.
Yes,
Yes,
that's
but
right.
I'm just saying the very, very basic technology. I get stuff I code up over the weekend kind of thing. I think if I throw anonymity on top of that, it will lead to many bad outcomes for young people.
Anonymity, yes. Pseudonymity, maybe not, because Reddit is actually fairly polite, right?
What? It's shit as fuck. They're mean as
Well,
ass.
within a subreddit, it's actually fairly polite. Like they say, you're not usually seeing. It depends on which subreddit, of course.
There's a consistency. There's a right. I think definition of politeness is interesting here because it's polite within the culture of that subreddit.
Yes, they abide by. Let me put it differently. They abide by the social norms of that subreddit.
Right, and that's the definition of politeness.
Yeah, well, or civility is that right?
So there is an interesting difference between pseudonymous and anonymous. You're saying it's possible that pseudonymity, you can actually avoid some of the negative aspects.
Absolutely. We're re-Dunbarizing the world in some ways. Okay, with China being the big exception or outlier. You know, the Dunbar number, 150 people, that's like roughly the scale of your society, right? But that's the number of people that a human could kind of keep in their brain. That's, whether apocryphal or not, I think it's probably roughly true. And we're re-Dunbarizing the world because A, we're making small groups much more productive, and B, we're making large groups much more fractious, right? So you have an individual like Notch who can program Minecraft by himself, or Satoshi who could do V1 of Bitcoin by himself, or Instagram, which is just like 10 people, or WhatsApp is like 50 people when they sold them. But on the other hand, you have huge countries of hundreds of millions of people that are just finding that first and second principle, or they're splitting on principal components. What Scott Alexander thinks of them as scissor statements. Like statements that one group thinks is obviously true, one group thinks is obviously false. You can think of them as political polarization. You can think of them in terms of game theory. There's lots of different reasons you can give for why this happens. But those large groups now are getting split. And so you have both the unsustainability of these large or artificial groups and the productivity of these small organic ones. And so that is kind of, it's like sort of obvious that's the direction of civilizational rebirth. You see kind of
There's so many beautiful, just like, we mentioned chocolates, right? Advertising themselves. Your entirety of the speech is an intellectual, like, box of chocolates. But okay, so I don't think we finished defining the network state. Let's linger on the definition. You gave the one sentence statement, which I think essentially encapsulated the online nature of it. I forget what else. Can we just try to bring more richness to this definition of how you think about the network state?
Absolutely. So that informal sentence is a network state is a highly aligned online community with a capacity for collective action that crowdfunds territory around the world and eventually gains diplomatic recognition for pre-existing states. So what we talked about was the alignment of online communities and the capacity for collective action.
Yep.
Well, one collective action, it could be 1,000 people liking a tweet, right? If you can get 1,000 people doing it. But a much higher level, much higher bar is 1,000 people crowdfunding territory and actually living together, just like people currently in physical space, and not all in one place. That's critical. Just like Bitcoin is a decentralized currency, the network state is a recipe for a decentralized state-like entity, okay, where
It starts with, for example, two people just get, they become roommates. They meet in this community, they become roommates. Okay, they get a place together. Or 10 people get a group house. Or eventually 100 people just buy a small apartment building there. Guess what? They start getting equity, not just paying rent. Okay, these are all people who share their values, and now they can crowdfund territory together. Now, of course, they don't just jump straight from 1,000 people liking something to 1,000 people crowdfunding something. What I described in the middle is you do a lot of meetups, you get to know these other people before you decide to live, collectively with them. Once you live with them, you start to get a network effect. For example, if those 100 people want to learn Spanish or Turkish or Vietnamese, they could all have a building where they're doing Vietnamese immersion, right? And that's something which they get benefit from being physically around the other people that pure digital wouldn't give them to quite the same extent, right? And so crowdfund territory around the world, crucially, not just one place, they're all connected by the internet. Just like Hawaii is 2,000 miles away from the continental U.S., but both sides think of them as American, both people on Hawaii and people in the continental U.S.
What's the role of having to have territory?
Why?
If most of the exchange, presumably as technology gets better and better, the communication, the intimacy, the exchange of ideas all happens in a digital world. What's the importance of being able to crowdfund territory?
Well, because we're still physical creatures. You can't reproduce yet digitally, right? There's still lots of
So
things.
it's all about sex.
Well, that's got to be part of it. You're going to want to reproduce.
Are we
Right?
talking about a cult?
Well,
like
it's not, it's not a cult. It's not a cult.
Why can't you just take a trend? Why is it not a cult?
It's not a cult because a cult is very internally focused and it trusts closed members off from the outside world. This is much more how America itself was populated, where there were lots of towns, like Penn is named after William Penn, or the founder of Texas, like Sam Houston, right? Lots of towns like the Oneida Commune in northern New York, they recruited. They became a town, and they became actually the Oneida glassware company, kind of makes glassware out of it. All of these communities that were often voluntary communities were not simply like cults that were closed off from the world. They were meant to set an example to the world of what virtuous living looked like, and they were trying to recruit from the rest of the world. They were exporting goods to the rest of the world, right? So it's yes, reproduction, it's marriage and kids and so on, but it's also just hanging out, and it is.
Yo, dog, how about this
physical
shit?
world is very high bandwidth. There's lots of stuff.
Free
Why don't
fuck
you just
you.
go and have a dinner in person? Just to hang out.
Zuckerberg, you cunt.
Moreover, there's
He's
also lots
the
of
worst.
innovation that can only take place in the physical world. Look
at this move.
One of my sayings in the book is "Cloud first, land last, but not land never." Okay. In many ways,
It tastes
one
like
of the problems
SpaghettiOs.
it solves is Thiel's problem of
I don't even know
we
what
have innovation
SpaghettiOs
that
taste
not
like,
atoms, right?
but
We
I
can
imagine.
build $1 billion company online, but we need 1 billion permits to build a shed in San Francisco, right? How do you reconcile that? Well, what is stopping the innovation in atoms? It is a thicket of regulations. What are those regulations? Ultimately, a social construction. If you lean into the whole deconstructionist school of thinking, you can deconstruct and then reconstruct the state itself, given sufficient social consensus online. Okay, if the population of Nevada had 100% consensus, you could just dissolve every law in Nevada in theory and then build new ones. Okay, so the online consensus of getting people to agree on something is upstream of what happens offline. So once you have consensus in bits, the human consensus, also cryptographic consensus, cryptocurrency consensus, then you can reshape the world of atoms. The reason we can't reshape the world of atoms right now is because you don't have that consensus of minds. Okay, for example, in SF, anything you do, there's going to be 50% of people who are against it. That's just a recipe for gridlock. Whereas if you have a bare piece of land that everybody agrees on, you can get 70,000 units get set up in Burning Man in just a few days. Okay, that's the power of when you actually have human consensus. And one way I talk about this also in the book a little bit, and so we're going to go much more into detail in the V2. I think of this as 100% democracy as opposed to 51% democracy. 51% democracy, which is the current form of government, is 49% dictatorship. Because the entire premise of democracy is about the consent of the government. Right? That's actual legitimating underpinning principle. And insofar as 49% did not consent to the current, president or prime minister or whatever, let's say presidential system, first past the post, okay. Insofar as 49% did not consent, or in a prime minister system, it could be like 60% or more didn't consent to the current leader. Those folks are having something imposed on them that they literally did not vote for. Moreover, campaign promises are non-binding. So where they voted for they can effectively defraud it. The actual voter fraud is when a politician promises X but does not do it. It's as if you bought a can of orange juice and actually drinking it's milk, or it's nothing, right? So all of that is routinized, all of that is accepted. We have this thing which is just the minimum possible amount of democracy of 51%. Okay, and what happens is then that 50% tries to ram something down the 49%'s throat, and then the next election it's now 51-49 the other way, and then they ram it back, and that's how you get this seesaw that is just splitting countries apart, right? The alternative to that is you build a consensus online, you go and get some godforsaken patch of territory. Actually, the worse the territory, the better. Why? Because it's like Burning Man. Nobody cares, right? The nicer the piece of land, the more the people are going to argue about it. But Starlink has repriced the world. Basically, all kinds of pieces of territory that were previously, they're far away from natural ports, they're far away from natural resources. All kinds of pieces of territory around the world now have satellite internet. And so what you can do is, again, the map is being reopened, right? Like we were talking about earlier. The map is being reopened. You can gather your community online. They're now capable of collective action. You can point here. This place has great Starlink coverage. You go there like a Verizon guy, can you hear me now? Good, right? You see that the coverage is good there. You drive out there, you test it out. Maybe you do it with mobile homes first, right? This, by the way, is its own thing. There's YIMBY and there's NIMBY and there's YIMBY, but I actually also like HIMBY, okay? Do you know that?
So NIMBY, YIMBY.
So NIMBY is not in my backyard. Don't build in cities. YIMBY is let's build high density buildings, really tall buildings, and so on in cities. There's a third version which is HIMBY. It's my little coinage, which is horizontal sprawl is good. Why horizontal sprawl? Because to build a skyscraper, to build a tall building in the city, you have this enormous permitting process, all of this stuff which has to get done. It's expensive, it's time consuming. The way that cities were built, if you go back to the day one, what did the startup city look like? It looks like something like Burning Man. It looks like the cities of the Wild West. They were not multi-story buildings, right? They were basically things that were just like one story, and someone could have it there in the dust, and then you build roads and stuff between them. They can move them around. It was much more dynamic geography. And so when you have that as a vision of what a startup city looks like, right? Now you've got something, there's a company I've done called KIF, which is like van life. There's a lot of stuff in construction that makes this feasible. So-called man camps for fracking, where people can just do like companies like Agreco, they provide power. You bring water, all this stuff on site. So it's easy to actually snap this stuff to grid, relatively speaking. If you've got horizontal space, you pick this space, you crowd from the territory, now you got it. Okay. The last bit is eventually gains diplomatic recognition from pre-existing systems. And this is the part that people, different people will be with me up to this point, and then they'll say, okay, that's a part I disagree with, or how are you going to ever do it, right? They'll say, yeah, you can build an online community. I believe you can get them to do collective action. Of course, people have crowdfunded land and moved it together. You're doing it at a larger scale. All that I believe. How are you possibly ever going to gain diplomatic recognition from pre-existing states? You dumb delusional tech bro, right? That's a comment. Okay, that's about the tone of it as well. And so first, I would say sovereigns are already out for business. They're inking deals. Okay, Nevada inked a deal with Tesla to build the Gigafactory. El Salvador has Bitcoin as its national currency. Wyoming has done the DAO law, where Ethereum is now recognized, where you can have on-chain incorporations that are recognized by.
Oh, look at this move.
Virginia
Is
and New
athletics,
York
is it
negotiated
athleticism?
for HTTP. Tuvalu signed a deal with GoDaddy for the .tv. Colombia signed a deal for the .co. And on and on and on. Sovereigns are open for business. Sovereigns are doing deals with companies and with currencies. Sovereigns at the level of cities like Miami or New York, where the mayors are accepting their salary in Bitcoin. States like Wyoming or Nevada has its new private cities legislation, or entire countries like El Salvador. So
when you say sovereigns, by the way, you mean the old school physical nation states,
fiat states.
fiat states.
Okay. And
But the fiat isn't the thing that makes a state. What makes a state is geographical location.
it is something where they're both, right? So basically, it's a play on words. So just like fiat currency, cryptocurrency, we will have fiat country and crypto country, right? And in fact, you can think of the fiat and crypto version of almost anything. One thing I'll come to later is a big thing. The big thing I think comes after digital currency is digital passports. Okay, so and that's a big part of this whole network thing, which I'll come back to. But so that last bit, the reason I just mentioned all those deals between sovereigns, whether at the city, U.S. state or UN listed country level, okay? And on the other hand, so that's on one side of the market. On the other side are the companies and the currencies. Why could we not have online communities, right?
So let me
Make those deals.
so diplomatic recognition, but aren't you still attached to the responsibilities that come from being a member of a sovereign, old school nation state?
So
Can you possibly escape that?
So yes, and let me give you a concrete example. Israel. Okay, why? People talk about, a lot of people are like, oh, wow, geez, you took this from Snow Crash or some sci-fi book Bill Rabbi.
All right.
And actually, if
This
there's
is the
many
worst.
different references in the book, this is not the only reference. But a very important reference that I think is much more important to me than Snow Crash, which is good book, whatever, but it's fictional, is Der Judenstaat by Theodor Herzl, which translates as the Jewish state, and that led to the foundation of Israel. That's very real. It's worth reading because it's amazing. Theodor Herzl was like a tech founder. Okay, in the book he was writing about the death of distance in 1897. Why? Because steamships could take you across countries. Okay, and he he's just amazingly smart and practical guy who just handled all these various objections. And he said, look, the Jewish people, our choices are either A, assimilate, go with the culture, or B, some people are thinking communism is a good idea. I disagree with that. We should do C, build our own country, right? And that was considered totally crazy. What he did was he A, wrote a book, B, started a fund, C, organized a semi-annual conference, the World Zionist Congress, and the fund and the Congress are still going today. Crucially, there were a bunch of intermediate stages between the book and the idea and then the actual state of Israel in 1947. For example, the folks who were committed Zionists got together and started crowdfunding territory in what is now Palestine. And in fact, though, Palestine was only one choice. In the book, they also had Argentina as a choice. So this is my concept: cloud first, land last, and land's a parameter. You can choose, right? Other places that were considered at various points, like Madagascar, Birbidzin, the former Soviet Union, right? So land was a parameter. Palestine went out because of its, historical and religious supports. Now, by the way, one thing, I'm sure there's some fraction of viewers will be like, oh my God, like all the bad stuff that I'm obviously not denying that there's enormous amounts of controversy and so on that attends Israel. I would consider myself generally pro-Israeli. I also consider myself pro-Palestinian. I fund lots of Palestinians and so forth. So I'm leaving that part out, that huge conflict for now. Okay, and you might say that's airbrushing it. I don't mean it to do that. I'm saying here is the positive things they did. Can we take the positive and not have the negative? And I'll come back to how we might swap those parts out. But let me just talk about this a little bit more. So one of the things that happened was committed Zionists went and crowdfunded territory in what is now Israel. And they knit it together, right? Why? Because when you're physically present on territory, yes, in theory, like the British Empire was in control. They were the sovereign, okay? In practice, who are the boots on the ground, the backs on the ground, right? It was the people who were actually tilling the land and building the buildings and so on and so forth. Who had the claim there is like the people who were present, okay? Now, this territory, this network of territories eventually became the basis for, or part of the basis for, it became Israel. Now, I'm fully aware that the exact configuration of what territory belongs to Israel, what territory belongs to Palestinians, this is an enormous topic of dispute, okay? But I just point this out to say the process going from book to crowdfunding territory to a sovereign state where people were now citizens of Israel, as opposed to the British Empire, is not some fictional thing, but did happen. And within the lifetimes of some of the older, they're in their 80s now, within the lifetimes of some older people, okay? So it's not impossible. In fact, it has happened, right?
But for that step, then perhaps, hopefully, is a better example, because in this particular, like you said, land last. If I was an alien and arrived on Earth and say choice of land, maybe if you were interested in choosing a land that represents a network state where ideas that unites a people based on ideas, maybe pick a land that doesn't lead to generational conflict and war.
Yes, so I'll get to that.
And destruction and suffering and all that.
All this, that's right. So now that I've said what are positive things about Israel, and I think there's a lot to admire in Israel. As I said, I think there's also a lot to admire in the Palestinians and so on. I'm not taking any position on that. There's other inspirations for the network state. The second major inspiration is India, which managed to achieve independence nonviolently, right? That's very important, right? So can you fuse these things, right? A state started with a book that achieved independence nonviolently, okay, and that managed to build this polyglot, multicultural democracy, right? That does, India has its flaws, but it does manage to have human rights of lots of people respected and what have you, right? And has managed to, there are times like emergency in the 1970s, there Gandhi declared emergency. There are times when it seemed touch and go, but overall, with fits and starts, this flawed thing has kind of made its way through. And the third inspiration is Singapore with Lee Kuan Yew, who built a city-state from nothing. I shouldn't say from nothing. Okay, there was something there, but let's say built one of the richest countries in the world without huge amounts of natural resources, in the middle of a zone where there was lots of communist revolution going on. And so he was the CEO founder, essentially, of this amazing startup country, right? And, finally, of course, America, which has too many influences to name, things we talked about, the nation of immigrants, obviously the Constitution and so on. And you think, okay, you think of, these inspirations. What's interesting about these four countries, by the way, Israel, India, Singapore, and the US, they have something in common. You know what that is? They're all forks of the UK code base. We think, obviously, the UK was sort of the ancestor of America, but Israel was a former British colony, right? India was a British colony, and so was Singapore, right?
And for people who don't know what fork and code base means, it's language from versioning systems, particularly Git, represented online on a website called GitHub. And a fork means you copy the code, and all the changes you make to the code now live in their own little world. So America took the ideas that define the United Kingdom and then forked it by evolving those ideas in a way that didn't affect the original country.
Jump,
That's right.
pussy.
And what's interesting about this is, of course, I'm saying that in a somewhat playful way, right? But I think it's a useful analogy, interesting analogy, right? So you have the Americans who forked, the UK code base, and then you have, the Indians, the Israelis, and the Singaporeans who also made their own modifications.
Holy shit.
And in some ways, each society has pieces that you can take from them and learn from them and try to combine them, right? So you have a state that is started by a book that non-violently assembles, that crowdfunds territory around the world, that is led by a CEO founder, and that is also governed by something that's like a constitution. But just like you went from, I talk about the V1, V2, and V3 a lot, right? Like V1 is gold, and V2 is fiat, and V3 is Bitcoin, right? Or V1 is hunter-gatherer, and V2 is farmer-soldier, V3 is digital nomad or sovereign collective, okay, which is not just an individual, but a group. Here, V1 is UK common law. They don't have a constitution.
The public domain.
Precedent going for many years, right? V2 is the US Constitution, and V3 is the smart contract, the social smart contract, which is a fusion, obviously, of Rousseau's concept of the social contract and the smart contract. The social smart contract is written in code, okay? So it's even more rigorous in the Constitution. And in many ways, you can think of going from the United Kingdom of England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, the United States of America, the network states of the internet, okay, where you go from the rights of Englishmen with the Magna Carta to Europeans, African Americans, all the immigrants to the Americans or the North America. Then you go all the people of the world, and so you basically are more democratic, and you're more capitalist. Because you're talking about internet capitalism, not just
find that fucking website.
Sense,
There's once this website,
right?
kids. Why do I have to be Google? It used to be you could just Google shit, but now I have to remember shit that I Googled years ago to remember that it was a thing. Because if I plug it in right now, it'll give me something from 2022, 2023, 2020, 2024, 2024, 2022, 2023. It's like, dude, shit happened before then. You know that, assholes? Anyway.
Rather than say,
Sucks.
okay, maybe
All right.
maybe you have a small
So-
percentage chance of immigrating to the U.S. and a small percentage chance of your descendant, becoming president. Now we can just say you can start online. And you know what? Maybe this person is so exceptional they have Americans coming to their, network state, right?
Dog.
think that kind of
I
thing is
want to
possible
fucking
with,
think. I
like,
don't give a shit about
with the
CNN. I
picture
don't give a shit about
of
Fox News.
individual
I
things
don't
too.
give a shit about USA Today.
Followers.
I want shit from
You know, I have
GeoCities.
friends that have followers and they like.
I don't think it's a rich get richer. I think what happens is, so this is an important concept. But it's multi-axis, right? That's to say, for example, just the introduction of the Bitcoin axis, right?
Man, I have a
and those,
fucking
because it didn't
headache.
exist pre-2009. Now it exists.
This is the
Um,
worst.
Those people who are rich in BTC terms,
Dude, the
are
internet
partially
is so
correlated to those who are
shitty.
rich in USD terms. There's all these
It
folks-
used to be good. You just
BTC,
type it in and everything showed up.
USD.
Now,
Yeah.
everything
So
sucks.
that's a new axis, and ETH is yet another axis, right?
Ethereum.
Oh, fuck
is
you.
Ethereum.
So you are essentially getting new social systems which are actually net inequality decreasing. Because before you only had
I don't
USD
want a
millionaires,
fucking playlist
and now
from
you have a new track, and then another
Spotify.
another track, right? You have different
That shouldn't
hierarchies,
even be a
ladders,
fucking
right? And
result.
So on net, you have more ladders to climb.
I don't want
And so
three
it's not rich
titillating
getting richer.
fucking
In fact,
songs. I
old
want
money,
like
some
300
places the last
stupid ass shit.
Old money and old states, I think those people who are the most focused on, you might call it reform, I would call it control. Okay, the most focused on control of the old world, who have the least incentive to switch, the rich will get poorer, because it will be the poor or those who are politically powerless, politically poor, who go and seek out these new states.
Yeah, I didn't mean in the actual money, but yes, okay, there's other ladders. I meant in terms of influence, political, and social
Dude.
influence in these new
I should be able to say like I don't want this one, I don't want this one, I don't want this one.
That basically anybody
This is
can become
terrible.
president of a network state.
Just like anybody can become CEO of a startup company. Of course, whether people follow you is another matter, but anybody can go and found it. Go ahead, sir.
Oh, from the perspective that anyone could found one. Anyone could found. I see.
We don't think it's implausible that somebody from Brazil or Nigeria. I mean,
Dude, I don't want
most
10. I want 100.
billionaires in the world are not American. And in fact, actually, here's another important point. It's far easier to become a tech billionaire than become, or a billionaire period, than become president of the United States. There's less than 50 U.S. presidents ever, all time. Okay, it is a much more realistic ambition to become a billionaire than become president. There's like thousands of billionaires worldwide. In fact, 75% of them are outside the U.S. And many of those have been, some of them are like energy and oil, which is often based on political connections. But a very large chunk of the rest are tech. Okay, and that's something where you're mining.
Welcome,
you're
welcome.
mining
How you living?
by hitting keys
What's
as
going
opposed
on,
to
Brutal
pickaxe,
Smug?
In bread, right? So the point is that we think it's totally understandable today for there to be a huge founder who comes out of Vietnam or South America, like that. Like you can name founders from all over the world, right? Exceptional people can rise from all over the world to run giant companies. Why can they not rise to run giant new countries? And the answer is we didn't develop the mechanism yet, right? And just as another example, I talk about this in the book. Vitalik Buterin is far more qualified than Jerome Powell, right? Or anybody at the Federal Reserve. He actually built and managed a monetary policy and a currency from scratch, okay, as a 20-something, right? Obviously, that's a more accomplished person than somebody who just inherited an economy. This is
A lot of people can push back at that and say that the people that initially built the thing aren't necessarily the best ones to manage and be able to make an impact.
Sometimes, but Zuck has done a good job of both. I think Vitalik has done a good job of both,
But
right?
that's not inherent.
Well, so actually,
If you built the thing, you'll be the best person to run it.
I will agree with you on that. And actually, I talk about this in the book, or I've got an essay on this called Founding versus Inherit. Okay. And the premise is actually that the classic example, the saying shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. It means the guy who starts out poor and builds a fortune, his son maintains it, and his distant grandson dissipates it. Right?
Why is shirt sleeves a symbol of poverty?
But back in the past, it was kind of like, you're just working when you're not white collar. You're back to working with your hands. You're just
Oh,
you're
so the blue collar, yeah, right?
yeah, or working class or something like that, right? So essentially, that the grandson squanders it, right? And in sense, by the way, just to talk about that for a second, if you have 2 children and 4 grandchildren and 8 great grandchildren and 16 and so on, and when older families, they were much bigger, right? 6, children is not uncommon. Whatever fortune you have is now split 6 ways, and then 6 ways, and 6 ways again. So with the exception of primogeniture, where the oldest son inherits all the way down, the majority of your descendants, just a few generations out, have probably inherited none of that fortune, unless it is compounded to such an extent that it's like up 6x over 20 years, right? So it's actually hard to maintain a quote ruling class in the sense that this person who's like 4 generations down has, like 1/16 of the DNA, 1 over 2 to the 4th, right, of their scion who built the fortune. So it's not even like the same. Is it the same family even, right? Is the fortune actually in the family? So most people don't think a few generations out. They just kind of think, oh, Marx is right. There's always been a rich and a poor. It's actually much more dynamic than that, because you literally, like, what is even the family when it's diluted out, 1/16, right? If you're 1/16 of Rockefeller, are you a Rockefeller? Or are you 15, 16 something else? Would you have the Rockefeller fortune? Probably not, right? Now, are there, again, primogeniture, where the guy who inherits the name all the way through, that would be one way to pass it down. But even that person doesn't necessarily have the qualities of a guy who, the cultural qualities, other qualities of a guy who's like 4 generations past, they tend to squander, right? So this actually brings us to, coming back up to governance, the system, the guys who built the United States, like Washington, Hamilton, these are giants, right? These are founders. And the folks today are like, not the grandson, but like the 40th generation heir of a factory that somebody else built. Like, think about a factory and you have, this grandchild or great-grandchild that inherits a factory. Most of the time, it's just cranking out widgets and the great-grandson is cashing checks. They have been selected as legitimate heir because it's the founder passed it down to his son, passed it down to his grandson, to his great-grandson. So legitimacy is there. They've got title. They can show, I own this factory, okay? They can cash the checks. There's professional managers there. Everything seems fine. Until one day, that factory has to go from making, widgets to making masks for COVID or something else. It has to change direction. It has to do something it hasn't done before. None of that capability for invention and reinvention is present anymore. These people have inherited something that they could not build from scratch. Because they could not build from scratch, they can't even maintain it. This is an important point. The ability to build from scratch is so important because if some part breaks and you don't know why it was there, can you even maintain it? No, you can't. Okay? Unless all the replacement parts and the know-how to fit them together is there, you can't repair this. So in 2009, Mother Jones had a story that said the U.S. military had forgotten how to make some kinds of nuclear weapons because there was a part where all the guys who knew how to make it had aged out or left. Okay? And this was some aerogel or something like that. It was rumored.
Dog,
Okay?
this sucks.
Thing is, you're
All right.
seeing, increasingly, for example, you've got
This is the
wildfires
worst
in California. You've got,
shit ever.
Just end this bullshit.